While my analytic focus is usually on the art of film, 2017's Doki Doki Literature Club is honestly one of, if not the most emotional pieces of media I've ever witnessed. By no means do I claim to have a deep understanding of the objective nature of video game design, but what I do have is a working brain and the ability to feel emotions, and the experience I had with Team Salvato's 2017 hit is one I will never forget, and one that I would like to share with you today. Not just as a personal documentation for my sheer love of the perfect execution in this game, but as a way of exploring and analysing what makes Doki Doki work so well, and how it managed to captivate an entire generation of audiences. But before I talk more about how a free visual novel made me lose sleep over a fictional girl, I need to take you back to September of 2017, Doki Doki's release date. Back then, I loved anime. Like, really loved anime. And especially that slice of life stuff, where the appeal is just cute characters doing cute things. Yeah, I like that. So imagine my excitement when I saw the release of a free slice of life anime visual novel on Steam. I made no second thought when downloading the game, too oblivious to notice some of the more suspicious tags on the store page. So yeah, I was one of the lucky few who got to experience DDLC completely blind. And while that made every reveal 100 times more effective to me, I'm so thankful that my first experience with the game's true nature wasn't through some cheap Sayori meme or just Monica being pasted everywhere. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For the following few days, I dedicated all my free time to playing through Doki Doki, and as I was still attending school at the time, it took me a little longer than usual to progress through the entire story. After around 3 days or so of enjoying the light-hearted antics within the literature club, I finally reached the ending of the game's first act, and I remember it like it was yesterday. That image of Sayori hanging in her room, her hands bloodied and her face cold, permanently affected me. Now, I'm not a very sensitive person. Subjects regarding death and self-harm don't often make me squeamish or scared, so my feelings here definitely don't originate from cheap shock value. In this instance, Salvato's masterful storytelling and pacing are what makes this moment so chilling. And this was just the beginning. That night, I physically couldn't sleep because of that one moment. A mixture of shock, awe, and absolute amazement kept me up, all accompanied by the unnerving image of Sayori's body burned into my mind. This sleepless night wasn't one out of pure horror, but a mix of excitement and appreciation of how perfectly constructed the game had been up until that point. A twist I never saw coming, an example of flawless writing. This feeling carried on through the next day. My walk to school didn't aid the mood. My commute had always been quiet and alone, and with it fast approaching winter, the black sky and falling snow seemed to perfectly reflect the occasion. All of this, however, only intrigued me more as to what else lay ahead in the literature club, something I was soon to find out over the coming days. Due to my expectations from there on, none of the following scenes affected me quite as much as Sayori's death. But there's no doubting that they cemented Doki Doki Literature Club as one of my favourite video games of all time. And while I could drone on endlessly about my personal connections and memories with the game, I'd like to take some time to focus on why Salvato's storytelling and technical execution makes the emotional beats of Doki Doki so perfect. When reflecting on DDLC, it's clear to me that Salvato poured so much time and effort into the game's writing and narrative structure. Practically every dialogue box is oozing with subtlety, creativity, symbolism and foreshadowing, which make the game endlessly more entertaining to analyse on subsequent playthroughs. My personal favourite example of this being most of Monica's dialogue before the end of the first act, constantly pertaining to not wanting to see Sayori get herself hurt, and how she says too much when hinting about Sayori's mental health. These seemingly harmless lines are hard to pick up on a first run through, but become eerily apparent when revisiting the game. And these are only two examples of a plethora of nuances and symbolism scattered throughout the entire story. But what speaks volumes more than the dialogue is each character's poems. For a game about joining a literature club, I'm surprised at the little amount of analysis there is when it comes to the poems the girls exchange throughout the game. Of course, there's the more obvious examples like Sayori's final message and Monika's hole in the wall, but some of my favourites take a little more thought. For example, during the first act, Natsuki gives the main character a poem entitled Amy Likes Spiders, an extract of which goes as follows.
You know what I heard about Amy? Amy likes spiders. Ickly, wiggly, hairy, ugly spiders. That's why I'm not friends with her.
At first glance, this just seems like another one of Natsuki's harmless poems, right? It falls in line with all the tropes of her previous work, with the themes of animals in relation to humans, and the rather childlike themes and tone. But when applying knowledge of the rest of the game, especially within the context of Natsuki and Yuri's relationship, this poem could easily be interpreted as Natsuki's opinions on Yuri. Perhaps something like this.
You know what I heard about Yuri? Yuri likes knives. Sharp, pointy, dangerous, gross knives. That's why I'm not friends with her.
Of course this is only a theory, but it doesn't seem to be the first time Natsuki hyperfixates on Yuri in her writing. During the third act of the game, Natsuki presents you with another seemingly normal poem, but in actuality, it's anything but. Reading.
I don't know how else to bring this up, but there's been something I've been worried about. Yuri has been acting kinda strange lately.
She continues to say how it's embarrassing, but she's really worried about her, and how she wants the main character to try and help to see what's wrong. I found this one to be personally one of the more effective moments within Doki Doki. While all the other poems after the first act have been overtly scary or cryptic, something about Natsuki's request feels so human and desperate. This plea for help, not for herself but for her peer, breaks the regular poem formula perfectly, in a way that isn't conventionally shocking, but rather emotionally effective by showing this often shy and deflective character in true desperation. In fact, Natsuki seems to be one of the only characters who realises what's going on other than the main character. She notices the change in her club members' behaviour, as well as dealing with the escalation of her own situations at home. Situations which I'd like to touch on now. Throughout the game, there are subtle hints at Natsuki's relationship with her father, the first of which appearing when choosing to bake cupcakes with her in the first act. Toward the end of your time together, Natsuki mentions how when her dad cooks, she needs to eat as much of it as I can. While this seems to be a rather harmless comment at first, it becomes apparent that Natsuki meant something much more sinister. When entering the second act, there's a chance the player can receive special poems during the club activity time. One of these poems is entitled Things I Like About Papa, and while none of these special poems are directly credited towards a certain character, it's safe to assume we know who this one talks about. It reads as follows.
Things I like about Papa. I like when Papa comes home early. I like when Papa cooks me dinner. I like when Papa gives me allowance. I like when Papa spends time with me. I like when Papa asks me about my friends. I like when Papa asks me about anything. I like when Papa gives me lunch money. I like when Papa comes home before sundown. I like when Papa cooks. I like when Papa gives me privacy. I like when Papa doesn't tell me how to dress. I like when Papa doesn't comment on my friends. I like when Papa doesn't comment on my hobbies. I like when Papa comes home without waking me up. I like when Papa keeps food in the house. I like when Papa uses his inside voice. I like when Papa leaves my stuff alone. I like when Papa accidentally drops coins on the couch. I like when Papa's too tired to notice me. I like when Papa's too tired for anything. I like when Papa is too tired for anything.
I personally find this particular piece to be one of the most chilling poems in the entire game. The idea of Natsuki's insecurity around the people she likes and things she does stemming from her father's emotional and physical abuse is one that's truly sickening to me. Salvato perfectly manages to turn what seems like a stereotypical tsundere character into an emotional study on the effects of such frequent mental torture. Her previous mentions of how she has to eat her meals and how she likes when Papa keeps food in the house are further solidified during the second act, when she passes out from hunger exertion, with only Monika knowing the reason why due to her behind-the-scenes manipulation. While I spent most of this time focusing on Natsuki's background, I must also mention how perfectly similar themes are handled with other characters. Yuri's story revolves around her peers discovering that she's cutting, which is hinted at through her poems during the first and second act, before being revealed during the third, and Sayori's story centres heavily around her depression, and how it affects how she perceives the people around her, explored through perfect juxtaposition with her seemingly happy-go-lucky character type. While I'm in no position to comment on whether these subjects have been handled realistically compared to real-life experiences, I'm willing to say that in a perfectly fictional sense, Salvato managed to make all of these themes have a serious amount of weight to them, without the need of overly in-your-face explanations or a lack of subtlety, and this is exactly why I believe the poem formula complements the story at hand so well. Being able to write a flawless story is one thing, but accompanying that story with a flawless visual design as well is a feat that shouldn't go unnoticed. The background UI and character illustrations by Satcheli and Valinquent, with the addition of Salvato's alterations during the second and third act, all perfectly trick the player into thinking this game is a normal moe visual novel, before subverting their expectations massively. The first act is the perfect length to make the audience get used to the game's established visual style. Pastel pinks and cute portraits are repeated throughout the gameplay in CGs, making the audience believe they know the rest of the game's tone, when in reality, this couldn't be further from the truth. This first becomes apparent when discovering Sayori's body hanging in her room. Her colours are visibly more desaturated, and the once colourful parts of her clothing use much darker tones than they did previously. This shift in colour is symbolic of the shift in Sayori's mental state, as well as emphasising the distorted image of her corpse. Jump to the third and fourth act of the game, and the pastel style, while still present, feels a lot more chilling and unsettling through Salvato's clever use of glitch and corruption effects, as well as some incredibly unnerving collage elements. We start off subtle, with certain character sprites and text popping in and overlaying incorrectly, backgrounds slowly zooming in and warping, and flashes of distortion on characters' faces when talking. All these techniques are incredibly effective at not only visualising Monika's control over the game, but also unnerving the player during the beginning of the second act, but things only get more hectic from here. When spending time with Natsuki and Yuri, Salvato demonstrates some of his incredible collaging techniques, which make the game genuinely unsettling to play. Natsuki having a strange animated mouth, Yuri's photorealistic eyes staring directly at the player, and Natsuki's blanked out facial features and dialogue are all perfect examples of this technique. These kind of effects can even carry over to the poems themselves at points, with characters leaving bloodstains on the paper, and chunks of text being scribbled or blacked out entirely. Some other noteworthy visual cues I think are particularly effective is the fast forwarding and static effects that come into play when the main character finds Yuri cutting in the halls, and the seemingly endless lines of corrupted dialogue when watching her body, a mental image which I personally find horrific to think about. Being left in a room over an entire weekend just to watch your friend's body slowly decompose. A scene that uses similar colouring techniques to Sayori's death. My favourite part of all of these effects Salvato uses is the fact that little to none of them are cheap jump scares. In fact, Doki Doki only contains one jump scare for players recording while playing the game. Steering away from poor horror tropes like this is a testament to the care and passion Salvato has for the genre, wanting his audience to come away feeling genuinely unnerved at the themes used in the game and not what made them jump. What makes the visuals really effective, however, is Salvato's incredible use of sound design and score, something I'll move on to now. Salvato continues his excellency over into the sound department, easily one of the most memorable aspects of Doki Doki. Whether it's the heartwarming Your Reality track, or the chilling off-key chimes of Sayonara, it's safe to say that there is at least one part in this game's incredible score that has stuck with an audience member. The original score has the benefit of being written, composed and mixed by Salvato himself, allowing him to truly translate the game's themes into an audio format. Much like his technique with visuals, Salvato establishes a set of themes and motifs for each character during the first act, and later manipulates them to subvert expectations in the second and third. A great example of this is the track OK Everyone, which has 5 different variations all to match each girl's personalities. Salvato then moves on to use a variety of different audio effects to evoke strong emotions from the audience, as well as reflecting on a certain character's struggles within that moment. Some of the best examples of this are presented during the latter half of the game, the most prevalent being his use of bending and shifting notes in a character's theme to be off-key and out of time, a simple technique that creates such an eerie atmosphere, my favourite example of this being during Natsuki's theme. Salvato's music can also be a metaphor for what's happening at that point in the story. Take for example this scene, when the main character discovers Yuri's cutting habit. As soon as the audience catches a glimpse of her wrists, the game auto-skips to the next scene, accompanied with an extremely sped up version of one of the score tracks, as if to replicate a wave of unease and realisation from both parties. This may be a stretch, but the sped up version of this particular song contains a very shrilly string sound, a sound that could almost symbolise the edge of a knife. Reminiscent of the blade that Yuri talks about cutting with, it definitely creates a similar sense of unease, and is a sound that is often associated with blades in other media. A similar technique is used for the infamous Yuri staring scene, when a muffled version of the track My Confession plays, overlaid by the sounds of a girl's shallow breaths. I feel as if this song links to Yuri in particular. The shallow breathing sound could refer to the pain of Yuri's cutting previously established, or perhaps the sound of pleasure, a subject hinted at when Yuri says, "I touch myself with the pen I stole from you." Salvato also utilises a lot of distortion in his music, most notably when trapped in the empty clubroom with Monika, and when Natsuki passes out in the clubroom. This perfectly links with the broken video game aesthetic heavily utilised during the final acts, and is something I'll explore further in my final point. Undoubtedly, Doki Doki Literature Club's most unique technique stems from Salvato's perfect understanding of the game's platform and how to make his narrative perfectly work within it. A lot of his visual trickery centres around distortion and computer glitches. It's clear that this game is a computer-themed horror, the best example of this being when Monika seemingly blue screens the user's computer during the second act. Computer horror isn't a new concept, but Salvato takes it to an entire new level with the use of one technique: the files. Towards the end of the final act, Monika reveals that the characters within Doki Doki's story are merely files in a game, and she means that quite literally. When navigating into the game's folder, we see a series of .chr files, all corresponding to a certain character. We then learn that altering or deleting these files causes the characters in the game to die. With this knowledge, curious audience members can return to DDLC and experiment with the character files, some of the results being truly terrifying. This haunting image appears when deleting Sayori's character file before starting a new game, and similar variations can be found via a multitude of different methods. But the .chr files isn't where Salvato's genius stops. Depending on your progression in the game, these hidden files will be randomly placed and removed from your game directory. They can range from crash reports written by Monika herself, or this eerie corrupted drawing of Sayori's death. These files never make themselves announced, and are purely there only to enhance the atmosphere for eagle-eyed players, but perfectly encapsulate why Doki Doki works so well as a horror for our contemporary technology. These are just a few of the incredible techniques in Doki Doki Literature Club that all combine to create the incredible psychological experience that affected me 3 years ago. The technical accuracy Salvato demonstrates in the game has already cemented him as an auteur in the video game industry, and one that should never be forgotten. Overall, Doki Doki has managed to communicate with me in ways a piece of media never has before. Salvato's understanding of mental health issues combined with his flawless visual execution made me feel every ounce of pain and sorrow the characters went through themselves. This game will forever be special for me, and a piece of media I will forever defend as a work of art that should be preserved for generations to come. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for giving me a platform to share my experiences and observations with the world. My feelings towards media often come from a place of passion, and being able to visually express and document those feelings is a gift I'm honoured to have. Thank you all for watching, and sayonara.